Right now, the whole world is obsessed with one question. Will they use nuclear weapons? According to Professor Jiang, almost everything you think you know about this war is wrong. If you don't know who Professor Jiang is, he made 3 big predictions back in 2024. One, that Trump would win. Second, he would start a war with Iran. And third, the US will lose that war.
In this class this semester, I'm making 3 big predictions, right? First is that Trump will win in November. Second is that the United States will go to war against Iran. And the third big prediction is that the United States will lose this war.
Now, 2 of his predictions have already come true, but he isn't guessing. He's using a mathematical model of human behavior to look into the future. And he has 3 specific predictions that will decide the fate of the world. First, will the US launch a ground invasion? The common belief is that the US wants to avoid another forever war at all costs. But the reality is a ground invasion is not just possible, it is necessary to win the war. Second, will the Al-Aqsa mosque be destroyed? This is the 3rd holiest site in Islam, and its destruction would trigger a religious war involving 2 billion people. Zhang's analysis says, yes, it will happen. And third, the question that brought you here. Will nukes be used? The answer is no. There will be no nuclear weapons used in this conflict. To understand why, we have to look at a concept called the law of escalation. Most people think war is simple, that the guy with the biggest gun wins. In geopolitics, this is called escalation dominance. If I have a knife and you have a gun, you have dominance. You have a superior weapon that, in theory, should end the fight instantly. On paper, the US and Israel have total escalation dominance over Iran. They have the most advanced air force in history, specialized bunker busters, and most importantly, they have nuclear weapons. Iran does not. By every standard rule of military logic, the US should have won this game years ago. But the law of escalation proves that dominance is actually a trap. Think about a standard street fight. It doesn't start with a gunshot. For example, A and B run into each other, and then A says, "Hey man, say sorry." And then B says, "It's not my fault." You say sorry. So there's a conflict, and it's usually a very small conflict. No one knows why and who's at fault. So they start cursing each other. So the first step is a conflict, and the second step is they start cursing each other. And then they might start pushing each other, and then they hit each other, and then they start the fight, and then one pulls out a knife and the other pulls out a gun. And this is the escalation ladder. You move up step by step, driven by 3 factors: emotion, power, and logic. And what moves you up the ladder is adrenaline. Adrenaline makes you stronger and more resolved, but it also makes you angry. And if you get too angry, you overreact. You jump from a push to a gunshot. If you do that, you lose. Not because you weren't strong enough, but because you lost control. You can't justify a gunshot to a push to the police, to the spectators, or to your own conscience. You win the fight, but you spend the rest of your life in prison. The core lesson of Professor Zhang's theory is this: control is more important than dominance. Winning a war isn't about how hard you can hit, it's about calibration. It's about timing and structuring your response to achieve a specific strategic goal while keeping the rest of the world on your side. This is where the US is failing and where Iran is winning. To see how this plays out in the real world, Professor Jiang uses the cafeteria thought experiment. Imagine a school bully. He's the biggest kid in class. He has a gang of friends, and they've created a system. Everyone in the cafeteria has to pay a tax of $1 just to eat lunch. At first, the other kids pay it because the bully keeps order. It's a small price for peace. But over time, the bully develops hubris. He thinks he's invincible. He starts charging $2. He starts treating his own friends like garbage. Everyone is angry, but they're too afraid to move. Then a new kid arrives. He doesn't know the rules, and he doesn't care. When the bully's friend asks for the dollar, the new kid says no. The bully can't just ignore this. His entire power is based on face or credibility. If one kid doesn't pay, eventually no one pays. He has to react. He tries to ostracize the kid, but the kid doesn't care. He tries to curse at the kid. The kid ignores him. The other kids in the cafeteria see this. They start smiling at the new kid. They realize the bully might be a paper tiger. Even the bully's own friends start thinking, maybe I should be the boss. Eventually, the bully is so frustrated that he punches the new kid in the face. The new kid is hurt, but he punches back. Now the whole school sees that the bully can be hit, so the face is gone. The credibility is destroyed. In this scenario, the bully is the United States, the new kid is Iran, and the cafeteria is the Middle East. The US is the passive player. Because they have to maintain their reputation as a superpower, they have no choice but to react to every provocation. Iran is the active player. They choose the timing, they choose the method, they are calibrating their moves to make the US overreact until the rest of the world decides the bully needs to go. When we look at the actual escalation ladders of the US and Iran, we see two completely different strategies. The US ladder is blunt and linear. It starts with decapitation, trying to kill the leaders. When that fails, it moves to attacking military bases, then economic embargoes, then attacking civilian infrastructure like water and oil. We are currently at the stage where the US and Israel are striking civilian-adjacent targets in Iran. The goal is to make the Iranian people so miserable that they overthrow their own government. But history shows this backfires. Attacking infrastructure usually unites a population against the outside invader. The US ladder ends with biological, chemical, and finally nuclear weapons. But you cannot just jump to the top. You have to justify each step to the world. Unless the US sees Iran using biochemical weapons, nukes aren't even on the table. They are a taboo. And if it's broken, the entire planet would turn against the US overnight. Now look at Iran's ladder. It's a decision tree with strategic flexibility. Iran's first move isn't to destroy the US. It's to close the Strait of Hormuz. This is the throat of the world's economy. 20% of the world's oil passes through here. By threatening the strait, Iran isn't just fighting the US. They are applying pressure to everyone who needs that oil. China, Japan, and the Gulf nations. This is the definition of calibration. Iran doesn't have to hit everyone. They can say to China, we'll let your ships pass. They can say to a neighbor, if you stop helping the US, we'll let you pass. They are selectively applying pressure to turn the US's own allies against them. While the US is throwing blunt punches, Iran is playing a game of surgical precision. The US wants to destroy Iran, but they don't even know what that means. The goal is ambiguous, which makes the military strategy confused and inflexible. Iran, however, has a crystal clear goal: force the US to retreat from the Middle East and take control of the Strait of Hormuz. Because Iran is active, clear, and flexible, they have escalation control, even if they don't have escalation dominance. But to understand why this leads to a mandatory draft in a 10-year ground war, we have to look at the math of the military itself. We have to look at the inverted pyramid of American power. In a standard realistic military, the pyramid is built on a broad base of infantry. Soldiers are the cheapest resource to produce in terms of time, energy, and money. Above them is armor, tanks, and artillery. Then comes the Navy, and at the very tip, the most expensive and resource-heavy asset, the Air Force. This is how wars of attrition are won. You use your most abundant resources to sustain the fight. But the United States has spent the last 30 years building an inverted pyramid. In the American model, air power is dominant, then naval, then armor, and finally a relatively small force of specialized soldiers at the bottom. The US has become addicted to what Professor Jiang calls video game wars. Think back to the Persian Gulf War in 1991 or the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Those weren't real wars. They were displays of overwhelming technological dominance. US pilots flew around bombing everything from safety while tanks rolled over a weakened Iraqi army. It was easy and clean. But Iran is not Iraq. Iran is a real war. They have sophisticated air defenses, a massive landscape, and a unified elite that has been hardened by 40 years of sanctions. You either take the country out in 48 hours or you're screwed. Why? Because you cannot sustain the cost of using a multi-million-dollar airplane to save the life of a single soldier indefinitely. If the US wants to win or even continue this war, it has no choice but to flip the pyramid back over. It has to return to the only cheap resource left, which is infantry. While the public sees two sides, the US and Israel versus Iran, Game theory reveals there are actually 4 major players, and their secret objectives are in total conflict with one another. First, the United States. Their goal is simple: destroy Iran. Why? Because if Iran is gone, the US maintains complete control over Middle East oil and global trade through the Strait of Hormuz. It's about maintaining the empire. Second is Iran. Their goal is to control the Strait of Hormuz and destroy CENTCOM, the American military presence in the Middle East. They want to be the new bully of the region. They want the surrounding nations to pay taxes to them, not the US. Then it gets complicated. Look at Israel. Publicly, Israel is the US's greatest ally. But strategically, Israel wants the US to get trapped in a long, grueling ground war that destroys American political will. Why? Because if the US is exhausted and Iran is destroyed, Israel becomes the sole, undisputed hegemon of the Middle East. They want to destroy the influence of both the US and the neighboring Arab states to pave the way for the Greater Israel Project. Finally, we have Saudi Arabia. They also want to see Iran destroyed, but they want the US and Israel to be weakened in the process too. Saudi Arabia knows their oil is eventually going to run out, so their only future is to control regional trade. And they are hoping for a chaotic conflict where all their rivals destroy each other, leaving them to rise from the ashes. Do you see the trap? Iran, Israel, and Saudi Arabia all have one thing in common. They all want the United States to launch a ground invasion. They are all working, in their own way, to manipulate the US into a 10-year quagmire. This leads us to the biggest question of all. If the risk is so high, why is the US doing this? Why risk a system-collapsing war for a piece of land in the Middle East? The answer lies in the heartland theory. The United States is primarily a naval power. Its global dominance is based on controlling the seas and the trade routes that connect the world. The greatest threat to a naval power is the unification of the heartland, the massive landmass of Eurasia. If Russia, China, and Iran unify, they can trade with each other entirely by land using high-speed railways. They don't need the US Navy. They don't need the US dollar. For the last century, the American strategy has been to prevent any great power from rising in the heartland. They did this in World War I and World War II by stopping Germany. So they do it today by creating conflict so that the heartland nations are always fighting each other instead of building together. But now, the BRICS nations, led by Russia, China, and Iran, are coming together. They are creating a cohesive bloc that could make the US irrelevant. The US feels it has no choice but to strike Iran now. If they destroy Iran, they fracture the heartland. They break the bridge between China and the West. They force the world back onto American-controlled maritime routes. This is a war for the survival of the American hegemony. Whoever controls the heartland controls world trade. And whoever controls world trade controls the world. So, where does this leave us? If Zhang's analysis is correct, the Middle East, and eventually the West, is moving toward a state of total war. To win a fight of this magnitude, a nation needs 3 things: focus, clarity, and resolve. Focus means unity. We are already seeing the crushing of dissent. In a war for survival, governments cannot allow internal arguments. You are either with the state or you are an enemy. Clarity means censorship. We see this in Israel and Dubai right now. They have laws preventing citizens from filming military strikes or posting unauthorized news. The government must control the narrative to keep the population from panicking or rebelling. Resolve means militarization. This is the shift where every citizen and every part of the economy is recruited into the war effort. This brings us back to the nukes. People ask, if things are this bad, why not just nuke them? Because nukes are blunt. They don't give you control, they give you a wasteland. Israel doesn't want a wasteland, they want the resources of the region. The US doesn't want a wasteland, they want a fractured, controllable heartland. Nukes end the game too quickly. The players in this game want a long, calibrated conflict that allows them to achieve their specific strategic goals. They want the new kid beaten, but they also want the bully exhausted. Professor Zhang's predictions are a warning. The United States will send in ground troops because the math of their military leaves them no other option. They will be manipulated into it by allies and enemies alike who want to see the American empire bleed out in the Iranian desert. The Al-Aqsa mosque will likely be targeted because religious extremists recognize that it is the ultimate escalation button to trigger a total religious war. But there will be no nukes. Not because of humanity or kindness, but because of cold, calculated game theory. Nuclear weapons break the law of escalation. They destroy the spectators and the police. They leave the winner with nothing to rule over. We are entering a period of history that will be defined by a 10-year struggle. A struggle that will involve a draft, massive censorship, and a total restructuring of the world's trade. The video game era of war is over. The real war has begun. And as Professor Jiang says, the only way to survive the game is to understand the rules before you're forced to play. The next few years will determine if his analysis holds. If he's wrong about one, his entire theory fails, but if he's right, the world we knew is already gone.